Welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. If you like the content that you're getting here, we invite you to support the channel. If you'd like to see this kind of content continue being available on the internet, we invite you to support the channel, and the details are in the description below. What I want to talk about today is the way of charity. The way of charity. And this emerged recently during my studies on the inductive method and Acts 9 and studying cognitive science and having discussions with other people that are involved with Beyond the Fundamentals and the Full Stature Initiative. The way of charity, what I want to share today, there's this constant struggle that I have. There's a constant burden to try to share things on this channel that I think will be a help. But there's also this struggle to have a common cultural grammar that we can share, where we say things and we all understand each other. And I'm pretty sure that some of the things that I'm going to say are going to go through your head differently than they're coming out of mine. So I'm going to try to minimize that as much as possible and try to clarify some terms. And one of the reasons I give preliminary explanations for things is so that you know where I'm coming from. I would not spend the time to make a video if I thought that it was a waste of time and that the information that I'm sharing wasn't going to be helpful. So bear that in mind as you listen to this, and I very much want to communicate to you something that has presented itself to me out of Scripture as the way of charity. And one of the struggles is all the words that I'm going to use is probably going to be ho-hum to a lot of people. Like this is nothing, I've heard all this before. And I've heard all that before too, but what I'm trying to convey to you today is different than anything I understood before. And I feel like a little synthesis happened. And I would like to share that with you if you would take the time and be so gracious to listen with me. In the Bible, in 2 Corinthians 12:1, there's this chapter on love, the love chapter we call it, but the word that shows up over and over again is charity, and the Greek word is agape. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 31, it's the last verse in 1 Corinthians 12. And he just got through, Paul, the author, just got through laying out the concept of the body and how all the different spiritual gifts play into that body and the roles that they play in that body. And he ends it up by saying, covet earnestly the best gifts, and yet I show unto you a more excellent way. And this phrase, the way, a more excellent way. The concept of the way shows up many times in the book of Acts. As we are going through Acts chapter, like in our Full Stature Initiative studies, we've been going through Acts, the book of Acts, and we're right around Acts chapter 9 right now. And we see this phrase pop up a whole bunch of times, this way. They're not called Christians yet. They're not called Christians until chapter 11, verse 26. And the disciples are called Christians first in Antioch in Acts 11:26. Well, Acts 11:26 hasn't happened yet. So there's this thing happening, and it's called this way. And so in Acts 9:2, Paul is going around, Saul at the time is trying to go around persecuting the Christians, and he desired letters to Damascus to the synagogues that if you found any of this way. And what is he talking about? Followers of Jesus Christ. They're following a way. They're not following a set of doctrines or dogmas. They're following a way. There's some kind of procedural knowing to it. I'm going to talk about the different kinds of knowing in a minute. But when diverse were hardened and believed not, but spake evil of that way before the multitude, he departed from it. What is that? What we would call Christianity. Or maybe it's not what we would call Christianity. That's kind of the point of this video. I think the Christianity that is the early Christianity and the Christianity in the book of Acts is actually not the Christianity that they had in mind. And this is kind of what I want to get at today. It's what I want to emphasize. But what should be called Christianity. At the same time, there was no small stir about that way. So there was no Christianity. When Felix heard these things, having a more perfect knowledge of that way, the early Christianity was referred to as the way, or a way, or that way, or the way that they call heresy, that kind of thing. They expounded when they took Aquila and Priscilla took Apollos and expounded unto him the way of God more perfectly. They didn't clarify doctrines. They didn't specify systematic statement of faith, stuff like that. It wasn't like that. It's a way. There's a way of it. Acts 22:4, and I persecuted this way unto the death. Acts 24:14, but this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers. Now this is very interesting, because here, this is his description of what he is doing, and the very second half of the verse, he kind of appeals to where they are, propositional knowledge, believing all the things which are written in the law and the prophets, rather than following a way. Because when you're not following the way, then you're believing things as propositional statements, propositional truth claims. So he's all things to all people, that he might by all means save some. So in the beginning, he describes, in the beginning of this verse, he describes where he is, and then he appeals to his audience, the council, by appealing to where they are, believing all the true things that you guys think are true, because that's their measure. He understands that that's not a measure of Christian growth or validity or anything like that, but they think it is. And so he presents himself in that way. And no pun intended. And in the same manner, if I was presenting myself to a church or fellowshipping with somebody, which just happened recently, I was talking to a few people, and they're going to ask you what your beliefs are. And so for the sake of the discussion, I might acquiesce to say I basically align with XYZ, something like that, because that's what they understand Christianity to be. They understand Christianity to be a set of propositional truth claims about things that you believe are true. And even though I don't think that, if I'm going to try to make some headway with somebody, I need to establish an inroad somewhere. Okay? And just because I try not to be propositional doesn't mean try not to be propositionally entrapped, doesn't mean there's no propositions involved. And some people make that mistake. Some people listen to my material and they think I'm against propositions. No. Propositions is what separates us from the animal kingdom. Okay? Propositional knowing. So let's look at the 4 kinds of knowing so you can kind of follow what I'm saying if you're lost so far. Now, those of you who follow the channel closely, you guys know this stuff cold, but we're constantly having people dial in new, and we're having to go back and show where we're coming from. There are 4 kinds of knowing that we find out in cognitive science, and the deepest kind of knowing is participatory knowing, and it's when you're in attunement with the arena. And the next kind of knowing is perspectival knowing, is what is it like to be aware of information, data, sights, sounds, whatever it is, from your perspective, from inside your head, from behind your eyes, the qualia of what it's like to be you. And then there's procedural knowing, what it's like, or being able to do something, having the power. They have claims of capacity or power. Procedure, like how do I throw a baseball? How do I catch a baseball? That's a procedure. Knowing how to do something is procedural knowledge. And then propositional knowledge is the most shallow kind of knowledge. Now these get deeper as they go up to number 1. Participatory knowing is the deepest kind of knowing. And one of the ways you can think about this is think about the things that you can perceive that a baby knows even before they can talk, okay? So a baby has been born, they're grown and developing. They get a sense, they start to know their way around the house. They start to know who mom and dad are. They start to know which toys they like. Then you would say, no, but they couldn't come out and tell you these things in words. There's participatory knowing. There's perspectival knowing, where they separate self, other, and world. Hey, here's another human who's like me. This is the wall and the floor that's inanimate, that's not like me or them, and then there's me. Start to separate those things. Then procedural knowing, they might start learning how to crawl or walk or play certain games, peekaboo or things like that. They can learn. So these things are nested within one another, and they must necessarily be. And then eventually they start saying things. Mama, dada, that kind of thing. Now when a baby says mama, you understand the role that word refers to, but you should also understand that any particular mama encapsulates an entire lifetime of a human being with very many aspects that you don't know. There's so much to that person. So when I say mama, and I'm thinking about my mama, you're using the same word, but you're thinking of somebody completely different, is a completely different person with a different set of character traits and attributes and all sorts of things. So that's one example of how a label cannot possibly capture all the things. Everything in propositional knowing is basically a pointer. It's an indexical marker, like a pointer, back to one of these kinds of knowings. And if it's not, if you have propositional knowing that is not a pointer back to one of these kinds, that is what we call a lie. It's a lie, okay? Especially if if it's conveyed as the intent to come across, like I went to the store. Well, if I did not go to the store, if there's no participatory element that took place, even though I'm saying there was, that's a lie. Now, it's possible to write fiction, but you started off by saying it's fiction, therefore it's not a lie. So follow me. Don't try to troubleshoot me too bad. Try to follow what I'm saying here. So I understand these things. You also have something that's very different kind of proposition, and instead of precise language that's trying to convey something, you might have some kind of poetic language that's trying to convey a feeling of something, or a sensation, or some kind of perspective that is difficult to precisely define. So words can be used that way too. And if you use words poetically, or if you use them, what's the word I was thinking of? Or in a narrative, then they can greatly expand how much can be extracted from them. And that's important to understand. The extraction part is every time you use propositional knowledge, it is data compression to a very extreme degree, very extreme data compression. Very extreme. So when the Bible, we have the certainty of the words of truth, and we have correct indexical markers pointing to things that are true, but we need to understand the things that it's pointing at. That's the goal. What is this thing pointing at? So you don't want to get caught up in the propositions without understanding that there is something in the other three kinds of knowing at which the propositions are pointing, if they are valuable at all. And if they're not pointing at anything in the other three kinds of knowing, then they're empty, vain, puffed up, lies, or, maybe not a lie, but entertainment, or, still could be vain if they're not pointing at anything here. Now that could bring us to a whole different kind of thing of what should we do when we interact with literature, okay? Which I don't really want to get into, but in short, literature, theater, movies, that kind of thing, books, fiction books even, actually going out and doing something is very expensive, very time consuming. And so literature is a way for you to imagine what it would be like to do the thing in a much less expensive way. If I read a book about going off cliff diving or going to Saudi Arabia and fighting in a war, that's much less costly to me than going off and fighting in a war. I can read about it, okay? So it's a way to conduct a thought experiment and imagine a scenario and what you might do in that scenario. We do these kinds of things all the time. We think things through. So humans, for the history of all humanity, we've always acted things out. We've always played things out so we can test them in our minds. Even children, participatory knowing, they watch their parents and then they pretend to go to work and go to the store, and they pretend to be the boss and tell people what to do, that kind of thing. You're always acting things out, and that's natural, and that's the way we should be interacting with literature, to find out what those things are. So we have these references here about the way. Now the way, what that would be, a way, the way of God, it would be procedural knowing. Procedural knowing. How to do something. Okay? There's something happening, there's a process that's happening that's related to God somehow, and you have to know how to be plugged into that process. Now today, Christian knowing is all about propositional knowing. It's all statements of faith and things you're supposed to believe, okay? And that's not how the Christians in the book of Acts saw things. So when Paul says in 1 Corinthians 12:31, I show you a more excellent way, that's what we need to focus in on. What is this more excellent way? And comparatively, more excellent than what? So I made a little list, and immediately it is more excellent than what the verse says it's about, spiritual gifts. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 is all about the spiritual gifts, and the last verse is like, covet earnestly the best gifts, but I'm going to show you a more excellent way. What that means is that the way he's about to talk about is more excellent than spiritual gifts. That's what that means. It's a very simple statement. What else is it better than? If you go throughout the book, it's better than factionalism, which they had a problem with. It's better than the wisdom of the world. It's better than excellency of speech. Now, these are all coming right from 1 Corinthians. It's better than carnality and immaturity. It's better than the planters and waterers that plant and water so the Christians can grow. It's better than that, even though these guys participate in what he's about to say, which is important. Instructors in Christ, it's better than that, even though it's more excellent than that, even though they also can participate in the way that we're about to go through. Empty speech. This is a good one that we're going to actually show this in just a second, and we're going to look at that passage. And then unity with leaven, like in 1 Corinthians 5, they got people who are some ne'er-do-wells. How often do they do well? Well, ne'er, okay? They got some ne'er-do-wells in the assembly, and they're unified with them. Some people preach that unity above all costs, that's the supreme doctrine. Can't we all just get along and get together? And you're causing disunity in the body. Well, there's a time for disunity, okay? And casting out the leaven out of the body, 1 Corinthians 5, having unity with leaven. This is better than that, too. The way of charity is better than false unity. So we need to get that. So let's look at this passage here. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 19, I want you to remember some of these words. But I will come to you shortly, it's Paul talking to the Corinthians, if the Lord will, and will know not the speech of them which are puffed up, but the power. But the power. This is very interesting here. It's not the speech, but the power. For the kingdom of God is not in word, but in power. So if I have propositional knowing, if my words are pointing toward a valid procedure, procedure is where the power claims are. I know how to throw a baseball. I know how to catch a football. I know how to pass a bill through Congress. That's where the power is. Being able to actually influence something to become different than it was before is, and then it's all nested in these too, because you have to have attunement with your arena to know what to do and for it to be relevant there. If you know how to hit a tennis ball, but you try to do it during a football game, it's misplaced. It's a procedural knowledge that is not relevant for that arena. So you have to have procedural knowledge that is relevant for the arena in which you find yourself. That's very important. So if you have speech, so what's happening here in this passage, the speech, but not the power, these guys have propositional statements that are not pointing at anything up here. It's just empty words. It's just vain words. It's puffed up. It's like a shell of a house with nothing on the inside. It's like the body of a car with no engine. It's just words. It's just nothing. It's like money with no goods and services. Propositional knowledge is like the currency of the other kinds of knowing, okay? Money is an abstraction of goods and services and value, okay? So whenever you exchange money, like when I get my paycheck from the job that I work for, from my secular job, that's an abstraction of the services that I provided to that employer, okay? That's what that money means. And then I can unabstract that, in other words, liquidate that into something else. Well, that is liquidating it. So I have the money, and then I can unabstract that back into some other good or service that I need, okay? So if I want somebody to cut the lawn, or if I want to go buy a car or something like that, if I want some kind of good or service, I can take that abstraction and turn it back into goods and services. But the money itself really has no value. Having my lawn cut has some value. A car has some value. The money that I use as an abstraction of those goods and services has no value in and of itself. propositional knowledge is just like that. They're just labels. It's just like hearing a language that you don't understand. It has no value to you. You have to have meaning from the other three kinds of knowing assigned to the phonemes and to the words before they have any meaning or value. So it is the assignment of real knowledge to propositional knowledge that gives it its value. But if you hijack the process and you employ propositional knowledge without it being properly embedded in the other three kinds of knowing, that is a lie. That is empty, vain words. It's virtue signaling. It's virtue signaling. We got some videos on virtue signaling. One of the problems with when you tell people, one of the reasons I'm afraid, kind of a little worried to talk about this stuff to like rank and file Christians, is because what people tend to do is when you describe what the end state of transformation looks like, people will learn how to performatively express that end state while not actually having congruitively embodied it within themselves to result in that end state naturally. They fake the end state. Okay? It's like taping oranges to an apple tree. You know, it's not what you are. You need to transform and become an orange tree. That's what you need to do. Procedural knowledge is claims on power. Propositional knowledge is words or speech and truth claims. So here in this passage clearly places a higher value on procedural over propositional. So for the kingdom of God is not in word, but in power. So in other words, things that pertain to the kingdom of God have the capacity to powerfully influence things so that the arena can be changed. That's one of the things that humans can do with God, is that we can actually grow reality. We have the capacity to do that, especially humans. We can not only can we adapt to any environment and live in any environment, but we can actually change the environment to adapt to us. And we have of all the species on this planet, we have the greatest capacity to do that. And so it's not just in word. If you just talk about a bridge, it means nothing. But if you actually go build one, now we're talking. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. The kingdom of God, it has to be not just words, but these words have to point to something that actually matters. Hebrews 1:3, who being in the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power. So what that's telling you is that you have the power of God represented by words. It's not the words themselves, but it's the power they represent, the word of his power. And it's the power that does the thing, okay? And it's the words that point to the thing. So you need words to point to the thing, but you can't get so fixated on the words that you don't get the thing, you see? And you have to get that. You have to get that. Christians, especially where I came from, with I had a Baptist, independent Baptist background before some of my recent insightful, there's been a lot of changes in my life lately, and it's just sickening to think of being in an independent fundamental Baptist church at this moment in my life because of how horribly misunderstanding it. I don't even want to get into it. It's kind of difficult to mention without getting into it. But to think of that and how we just throw words around. We're so focused on the words, the wave the Bibles around. We got the right Bible, Okay, you got the right Bible, but you're not looking, those words, that right Bible that you have, that's just a window that you can look through to see something. And that something that you can see, that's what the focus needs to be. And once you can see that clearly, which window you look through no longer really matters so much. Because now you've seen it clearly. And then when you haven't seen it clearly, you absolutely rely on letter-by-letter accurate descriptions. So I haven't seen the thing, but I've seen a description of it. And so the only thing you have to go off of is this description, and then you're going to be really concerned about whether or not those words are correct, okay? But if I see a thing and somebody else sees a thing, I can discern whether or not he's talking about the thing that I saw without having to check the exact words that he uses because I've seen the thing, you see? And everyone who's so focused on precisely what the words have to be, what they're telling you is that they haven't seen the thing yet. They don't have any vision. There's no vision, the people perish. They have no visibility on what it is, on what the spiritual reality is. They're not seeing the kingdom of God. They're not perceiving it. So there is this component of power toward which the words must point. James tells us, and what we see here is that people need to do things. You need to be a doer of the work, and you'll be blessed in your deed. If any man be a hearer of the word, not a doer, he is like unto a man beholding his natural face in a glass, like in a mirror. For he beholdeth himself, and goeth his way, and straightway forgetteth what manner of man he was. But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty, and continueth therein. And when you think of faith, I want you to think of faithfulness, like fidelity. I want you to think of this ongoing continuance, continueth therein. He being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work. And when you think doer work, you're probably thinking of like going to church and reading your Bible and cleaning out the toilets and being in the bus ministry. And no, it's not that kind of thing. That kind of thing will get you in. It might keep you out of trouble until you can see the thing. But that's not the thing. He being not forgetful here, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed. Now, what doth James 2:14-17, what doth the profit, my brethren, though a man say he hath faith and have not works, can faith save him? If a brother or sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say to them, depart in peace, be ye warmed and filled, notwithstanding ye give them not those things which are needful to the body, what doth it profit? And it's a rhetorical question. It means it doesn't profit anything. What does that mean? To say, depart in peace and be warmed and filled, that's propositional knowledge, and you're not doing anything procedurally, perspectively, or participatorily to actually bring it to pass. Those words mean nothing unless there's something to back them up in the other kinds of knowing, unless there's some kind of action or real thing to back them up. Even so, if faith hath not works, it is dead being alone. Even so, faith, if it hath not works, it's dead being alone. 1 John 3:16-18, John says, hereby perceive we the love of God, because he laid down his life, not love, agape, because he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. Well, how do you do that? What you do is, in agape, you sacrificially commit to the transformation of the other person, even if they're kicking and screaming and don't want it. And there's a word that I want to... When most Christians think of trying to help another Christian transform, you're probably thinking of teaching them a bunch of things that you think are true. But I want you to start thinking of it in a different way. There is a role, if you want to help another Christian, first of all, you need to see if you're the one that needs to be helped. Is it yours to do? Okay? When you're trying to edify in the Ephesians 4:16 model, it should be yours to do, but are you there yet? Okay? And if you can perceive some of the kingdom of God, and your job is not to tell people, not to give people more explanations of the things that they can't see. Your job is to use anagoge and draw them and pull them to the place where they can see and no longer need an explanation. And another way you could say that is your job is to disillusion them of all the things that are clogging up their eyesight so that they can't see. And I want you to start thinking about how to do that. How do I interact with other Christians in a way where, instead of being the guy that has all the answers, what can I say or do to lovingly and sacrificially help this person to disillusion them of the things that are in their life that are stopping them from seeing clearly? Okay? And most of the things that are stopping them from seeing clearly in this culture are probably religious things that are on somebody's goody two-shoe to do good list, okay? And the people have to be disillusioned of those. They have to be broken free of those. And you have to chip away the marble and the dirt and the scum and the crud so that you can clean off the window and they can see through it and see what's on the other side. What are these words pointing at anyway? And you don't really have anything to teach them, and it's pretty hubristic of you to think that you do. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to chip away the wrong things that we think so that we can see clearly. So your job, to lay down our lives for the brethren, but whoso hath this words. And so when you do that, when you're trying to disillusion somebody of the things that are preventing them from seeing, it's going to be a fight because they think they need those things. They think they need their statement of faith. They don't think they can be protected without it. They don't understand. And so you're going to engage in a struggle with them, and it's going to cost you something. And they may have other issues. And when you're trying to work with somebody so that they can transform, they're going to be resistant. It's going to cost you some time. It's going to cost you some resources. It might even get all up involved in your life and kind of affect your way of life in a way or two or three, in a negative way. It might do that. But you lay down your life in love, in agape, for the anagage, for the upward growth and ascent of the brethren, so that they can grow, so they can be more like Christ, so that they can see. They see clearly. That's what you want. So they have to be disillusioned of the things that are stopping them from seeing clearly. But whoso hath this world's good, and seeth his brother have need, and shutteth up his bowels of compassion for him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? So you see that there's a need, but you don't do anything about it. That's not love. That's not agape. And so this is simple stuff. Like you see your brother has a need, and over in James it's talking about a person who has they're naked and destitute of daily life. It's like physical things. But we're not talking about we need to be able to see above that too. It's not just physical things. When you see that somebody has a need to be disillusioned of their propositional truth claims that they think comprise Christianity, are you actually going to step up to the plate and try to do something about that? Are you going to try to call that into question? Are you going to try to do something to get that person to think, to wake up a little bit? Are you going to play that role? Is that yours to play? Can you? Are you capable of playing that role? Do you need to have that role played on you a little more before you're ready for that? Are you ready to edify? Are you ready to help edify? Because there's a certain level of personal sovereignty that you need to bring to the table, certain amount of capacity that you can bring to the table, and a capacity to see clearly, and not be resentful and not be overcome by trauma. There's certain things you need to bring to the table so that you can help other people. Not everybody's there yet. Not everybody's there yet. So it's time for you to go into crisis mode and wonder, why am I not there yet? And what do I need to do in order to disillusion myself of the things that are stopping me from being able to see clearly? My little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, propositions, but in deed, procedural, and in truth, all four kinds of knowing. And when the Bible uses the word truth, it's not just a statement that happens to be a fact. It is being in alignment with the participatory, having genuine participatory attunement with the arena. Having that genuineness to where you can execute processes that change yourself and the arena for the better. And what that means is that you're understanding reality enough to where that you can interact with it and do good and proper things. And that is the truth of the way. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Think of truth more so when Jesus says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Think of it like the way. It's being in fidelity, like in harmony and in congruence with something that's moving, okay? And so the Spirit moveth about whithersoever it listeth. And if you can sense that, if you're with the Spirit and you can move with it, you have fidelity with it, you have congruence with it, and you're truthful with it, okay? Like somebody says, I fire my rifle true, okay? You're aiming correctly, you're properly oriented, you have a good goal in mind. So some of the things that occurred to me in 1 Corinthians 13 is that I want to show you is he calls it a more excellent way. So if you look at the way, I want to look at the verbs He uses a bunch of verbs. He doesn't, notice Paul does not say, hey, yeah, I will show you a more excellent statement of faith, which is more true than the one you had before. No, 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 no. It's a way. It's procedural, which is embedded. See? It's procedural. It's a way, which is embedded in perspectival and participatory knowing in order for it to be valid. It's embedded. It's nested. These things are nested in the others. And they have to be. So when he says, I'm going to show you a more excellent way, that should get our attention. And that should tell us. And then that should draw our attention to the fact that when he starts to describe what charity is, he uses a bunch of verbs. He does not give you a bunch of things to believe, you see. He gives you a bunch of verb descriptions, procedural descriptions of what charity is, of what agape is. Okay? I want to talk about the growing up aspect. Now, there's a Greek word, anagage, and that is like a transformational, transitional effect of charity. Think of how sacrificially a parent loves a child, and there's nothing the child can do in return to the parent. But the parent decided to have the child, so it's their responsibility. And when they decide to have that child, they're also deciding to commit in love to bring that child along, to tug them along and help them transform into what they need to be a successful citizen of the country and be able to support themselves and, enjoy a full life and have joy and good experiences and that sort of thing. So a parent will do that. And so agape and anagage have a relationship to each other. Agape reaches down in love. Agape reaches down and pulls the subject along the anagogic path toward growing, toward developing, toward transforming to their sacred second self, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes. The current knowledge that we have is less than perfect, and when that which is perfect has come, that which is in part will vanish away. When we see clearly, 1 Corinthians 13:12, and know, when I say know, knowledge, when we know in a full and complete way, knowledge doesn't go away. It kind of looks, knowing in part goes away, is what looks like goes away. And we'll look at that and how that relates to the four kinds of knowing. So it's like a participatory knowing. And Adam knew his wife and she conceived and bare a son. And some of the new versions of the Bible saying Adam had relations with his wife. Well, that totally ruins everything. Knew is such a good word there. It shows you how the Bible uses the word know, and in that sense, it is a participatory knowing. And the knowing that we get later in 1 Corinthians 13 is a participatory knowing. It is not just a proposition. It's not just being able to memorize facts. That's not it at all. Charity, part E down here, is a way that affords transformation. A set of behaviors and processes. But it can't be prescriptive to where someone says, do these things and then you'll be healthier in 6 weeks. It's not like that. It's hard to describe. It's a way of being that results in transformation. And it is the very key thing we need to get is that it is greater than faith or hope. 1 Corinthians 13:13. It's greater than these things. And I'm going to ask you a question when we get to that verse. I'm going to ask you a question. And I think it's interesting. So in the first few verses, he tells you what charity, doing things without charity makes them valuable. Though I speak with the tongue of men and angels and have not charity, I am become a sounding brass or tinkling cymbal. So speaking, in other words, you might as well be speaking a bunch of gibberish, a bunch of clean, clangy stuff. You might as well just make a noise. If you're not reaching down into a person and dragging them upward along the anagogic path when you speak, then you're just flapping your gums. Though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. If you do all that, but you're not reaching down in agape, charity, love, and pulling somebody up the anagogic path of growth and upward ascent and transformation, then nothing that you can do matters. If you cannot do something that results in the growth and transformation of other people, then none of it matters. Okay? You could be a Jedi Knight. It would not matter if you're not helping people grow and edifying other people. Let not no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, to build people up, speaking the truth in love. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. You do all that stuff. And some people say, well, so-and-so was burned at the stake, like that makes their doctrine true. Well, sometimes I'll disagree with Calvinism somewhere, and they'll be like, yeah, but all these Calvinists were burned at the stake. Well, I'm like, burning somebody, being burned at the stake, that's a horrible thing. But being burned at the stake doesn't make somebody right. It doesn't. So if you do all that and you don't have charity, if you're not reaching down in agape and dragging people upward along the anagogic path, it doesn't profit anything. And if people burned if it's according to this verse, if people were burned at the stake and all they were doing was perpetuating the ideological possession of all the statements of faith of all the denominational churches, it was absolutely profitless. There's absolutely no reason they should have done any of that. They'd have been better off just to deny everything there, keep living, and then start over with real faith. I'm not saying any particular one had that problem. I'm just saying that if that's the case. Because you have to understand that Christianity, I'm in the United States. I know we have people watching all over the world. I'm in Louisiana in the United States, if that means anything to you. And the church here is so propositionally entrapped. All of the activity of church is basically a scheme to get people to take on a system that prevents them from seeing clearly. It's all systematic theology, getting people to be persuaded to take on a certain set of beliefs. Persuading people. It's like the meme complexes themselves. Imagine each denomination is like a little virus or a bacteria, going around, and the soil that it's eating is people. And it's just trying to get more people and trying to get more people, doing whatever it can to get more people. And they might have propagation memes, parts of the meme complex that help spread the word. Or they might do it in some other way. If we do some of these good deeds and use soup lines and feed the poor and do these other things, then that will cause people to come join our in-group and believe our things. And that's all it is. And when you think of, people think they're standing up for Jesus, but when people join something like that, all they're becoming is ideologically possessed. And you can tell by how they frame things in a moral way. An ideologically possessed person presumes that those who disagree with them do so for moral reasons rather than for epistemic reasons. And that is rampant throughout Christianity. Charity, now he tells you some verbs. Charity, agape, that selfless, sacrificial desire for the well-being of the object of the affection. Charity suffereth long. In other words, it endures for a long time. It's kind. It doesn't envy. It's not jealous. It doesn't vaunt itself. It doesn't puff itself up. It's not puffed up. Now, puffed up has a precedence so far in this book. And puffed up comes right here in 1 Corinthians 4:19 through 20. And it's used a few more times in this book. I think in chapter 5 it comes up too. And puffed up is a reference to speech without power. Propositional knowledge, a statement of faith without actually following the way. I don't have this on here, but I should share it. Somebody posted on Facebook, are there any followers of the way anymore? And I should have put this on here. And they're not. No. All the Christians, all the churches right now, they're all following statements of faith. They're all following propositional Jesus. They're not following the way. And what that means is that they're puffed up. It's like a housing market bubble. It's a bunch of currency with no actual commodities to support it. That's exactly what it is. And all the words with no knowledge, commodities, and the other three kinds of knowing to support it. That's what's happening. It doth not behave itself unseemly. It seeketh not her own. It's not easily provoked. It thinketh no evil. Rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth. What are all these? Look at all these verbs. Look at these verbs. It beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. And so you say, believeth all things? What about contradictory fact claims? That's not the point that he's trying to make here. What he's saying is that he's not cynical. He's not cynical and resentful and nihilistic. And that when the going gets tough, when you're trying to build the bridge and you run out of the materials and it seems like it's never going to get done, you keep at it anyway. And you find a way. You find a way to make it happen. You find a workaround. It's like project management. Charity never faileth. Never faileth. You can always, see, if you're still breathing, you can always do something to make your environment better. And you can do something to make your environment better, which will afford another way to make it better. And you can do something to make your environment better, which will make it better for other people and to afford opportunities for transformation to take place. You can always do something if you're still breathing. If you're still moving around, if you're still alive, you can always do something. That value of life, it's always there. You can always do, no matter what your dire circumstances are. Even Viktor Frankl, when he was in the concentration camps, once he resigned himself from trying to always look toward escape, but decided that he was going to make the best of each day that he had, that's charity. That's the anagogic transformational ascent. Those are the people that survived and came out. Never failed. You can always be charitable. You can always have that agape and for self and for others to tug along the anagogic upward climb, that path of transformation. Be more like the image of Christ. But whether there be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. All this stuff. Charity is what matters. For we know in part. We prophesy in part. So there's nothing that we have today that is full and complete. Even the Bible, it's true, it's not false, but it's just indexical markers that are pointing at something. You know? And what is the thing that it's pointing at? Well, we only know in part. We know the words. Well, when you can see clearly. The precise words that are used become less important to you. But you have to hang on to those words when you can't see clearly. But there should come a time, and people are going to misunderstand me on this, but there should come a time when you can graduate from relying so heavily on descriptions and explanations because you have seen clearly. And am I saying you should outgrow the Bible? Absolutely not. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I know there's people out there accusing me of being a open revelationist and all this kind of stuff. Well, what that proves is that they can't actually refute the things that I do say. If you have to make stuff up, then you have a problem with the things that I do say, and you can't refute them. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. Now, a lot of people who, they're cessationists, or maybe they're like a certain version of the Bible or something like that, they will try to use this for the Bible. Like when the Bible comes and it's perfect, then the sign gifts will go away. And that's not what this is talking about. Okay? That's not what this is talking about. And even if you're sympathetic to that viewpoint, don't use this verse for it, because that's not what they have in mind here. That which is perfect is come, that which is in part shall be done away. So then there's the growth aspect is coming here. When I was a child. Okay, so that which is in part. If you have a bunch of descriptions of a thing that you haven't seen yet, say you have a description of, like, under the hood of a sports car. Okay? But you've never seen it before. You would have to heavily rely on these descriptions until you actually see it and can examine it for yourself. And that's why they say seeing is believing. Okay? You want to see clearly. That's the point, is to see clearly. And once you do, you no longer know in part, you now know in whole, because you've seen clearly. But when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. Once you see clearly, once you have participatory attunement with God, everything else that is pointing us to the thing will no longer be relevant, no longer be needed. And now we have this transformational thing here. And basically the idea is that there comes a time when you need to grow up. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. And the idea is, in 1 Corinthians, you guys are carnal as carnal can be. You guys are the natural man, you're carnal, you don't have any wisdom. I could not speak to you with wisdom, but I can only speak to them which are perfect. I can only speak the wisdom to them which are perfect, because the other guys can't handle it. They couldn't receive it. That's 1 Corinthians 2. And you guys are carnal. But there has to come a time. There has to come a time when you have to graduate out of that. And you have to train, you have to change into something. You have to grow into something. You have to anagage and grow up into something else. You have to transform into something. For now we see through a glass darkly, then face to face. And a lot of people talk about the mirror here, but the glass could also be like a telescope, like they used to have on the ships. You look through a telescope and you can see afar off another ship in the distance, or the land, or something like that. And it's not a very clear image, and it's not as good as seeing up close and personal and face to face, and it's darkly, or through like a foggy window, or through a window that's the glass isn't very clear, or in a mirror where it's not very clear. But you're seeing through the window or through the telescope to something else, and you can't quite get the whole. You can get something. You can get something of it. But you can't quite get the whole thing. But then that medium, that lens through which that lens through which we have to look to see is one day going to be removed, and we're not going to need any explanations because we're going to see face to face. But then face to face, now I know in part, but then shall I know even also as I am known. God knows us. He can see us directly. You can look down dimensions a lot more easily than you can look up dimensionality, okay? But we're going to know exactly as I am known. Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it does not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And now abideth faith, hope, and charity, these three, and here's a very clear value statement, and listen to me. But the greatest of these is charity. The greatest of these is charity. You have faith, hope, charity. The greatest of these is charity. At your church, do you have a statement of faith? What's greater than faith? Charity. Says it right there. Right there, black ink on white paper. The greatest of these is charity. Where's your church's statement of charity? You ever heard of a church with a statement of charity? Well, if it's so much better than faith, where's that? You see? You see how we've been doing things all wrong in Christianity? The London Baptist Confession of Faith. Where's the London Baptist Confession of Charity? You see, the priorities are wrong. The priorities are mixed up. People, they get focused on the wrong thing and they start copying each other. Reminds me of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, that said that intelligent intellectual thought is non-imitative. Okay, where's the church's statement of charity? Maybe instead of a statement of faith, we should first have a statement of charity. And it would have to be something of a way. It had to be a description of a way. It could not be a list of things to believe. You see? And if you were following the way of charity, perhaps faith would simply be an outgrowth of it. Or your statement of faith would look a lot different than it does now. What if it was a requirement to have a statement of charity before you could have a statement of faith? How would that look? How would your church look then? What would it say? What if you personally had a statement of charity? What would your statement of charity look like? So I'll kind of tell you a thought that passes through my head, and I'll try to represent this graphically for you. This may be kind of silly. Down here you have this, that's you, it's a little dude, okay? And don't be offended if it's not female and you're female, or if you're gender fluid or whatever. I'm just, for simplicity's sake, I'm putting a dude there. And he's running in this arrow here is the anagogic upward growth ascent. You, in other words, you desire to be more like Christ every day. And you commit, you try to sense participatorily God, and through his word, spirit, prayer, distributed cognition, the Ephesians 4:16 edification model, all these things together, you're trying to get a sense of God. You're trying to move with God, have fidelity, truth, have fidelity with the movement of God in reality, with reality, okay? Now you're aiming for something. Now you know, beloved, now are we the sons of God. It's not yet appear what we shall be, but we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. You don't know what he looks like. You don't know the image of Christ. You don't know what that is right now. You know what it is. But you know where you are right now. So what you do is you set the mark that you're pressing toward. When you're glorified, you don't do any of that. But what can you do something about? What is yours to do? The mark that you're pressing toward is a version of yourself in the future. And it's not just goal setting and that kind of thing, but you think about not just the things that you want to have, but switch from having mode into being mode. What kind of person am I going to be in 5 years? What kind of person am I going to be in 10 years? Or go all the way and say, what is the absolute best version of Kevin that could possibly exist? What does that look like? And you think about that. Maybe you make a feature list, okay? And maybe you think about how the being would be and how charitable that person would be. And imagine what they might be able to see clearly by that point. Imagine what they might be disillusioned of by that point. Imagine how much more wisdom they might have in their relationships by that point. Think of as many different aspects and components of your life as you possibly can, and very seriously consider what those will look like if you were perfect. Like if Jesus Christ had to come down, if you ever saw that show Quantum Leap, where it's an older show, but Scott Bakula, the actor, he would as a time traveler, he would leap into somebody else's body, and he had to do whatever was the right thing. He had to set something right in history or in that person's life. And he had to do the right, and as soon as he finished it, he was gone, he'd hop into another body. But imagine that's you've hopped into this body, and you have to figure out what are the best things, what is the best thing that I can do with my time, resources, money, family, relationships, what is the best thing that I can do to become the best thing that I can be? And you aim for that, because by definition, there is nothing better you can do. And you think of the people that you influence in your life, and you think, what is the best version that they can be? And not in this controlling kind of Bible Belt kind of way where you're trying to tell everybody else what to do all the time, but how can you be an agapic influence in other people's lives where you can help disillusion them of the things that prevents them from being able to see clearly? Not telling people what to do, not telling people you should go to church more often, you should read your Bible more often. No, none of that. Not like that. But what can you do? And maybe you don't say anything, but what can you do to help disillusion people of the things that are blinding them? What can you do? And if you have not only a vision of your own sacred second self, the best version of you that you think could possibly exist, you have that for other people too. And you're going to interact with them in a way that helps them reach their version of that, and that will necessarily be a sacrificial thing, self-sacrificial thing. It will cost you to do that. Lay down your life for the brethren. So when Paul says, I press toward the mark, that's what I'm calling over here, this sacred second self. It is your imaginal version of the best possible you that could possibly exist. If I'm conformed to the image of Jesus Christ, if Jesus Christ hopped into my body like Scott Bakula from Quantum Leap and started doing everything right in my life, what would that look like? What would that look like in my life, okay? Now, you say, what would Jesus do? Well, Jesus had his own particular mission in his own particular life in that, but imagine that essence in your life, having to live your life, make your decisions in your environment, in attunement with your arena, all that stuff. What would that look like? You think about this transformation. Why do I have a butterfly here? Because of metamorphosis, going from a caterpillar to a butterfly. It's just a picture of that. And I'm sure butterfly means something horrible in some crazy religion, and I'm going to be but all I did was I just Googled a picture of a butterfly. That's all it is. Okay, so don't read into that. I don't know if it means something else. And in this case, it does not. Just whatever your transformed self looks like. And then that mark, that is your mark. And Paul said, I press toward the mark. That's your mark. You see? You have to set that. You have to you have to bring that about. What is the will of God for my life? That's what you have to come up with. You have to think about that. Now, a couple things with this is that, number one, the transformations it's not just going to be one transformation. There's going to be a series of them. It's going to be a series of transformations in your life, so you need to bear that in mind. So don't think you're just going to be one and done. Number two, you will constantly need to recalibrate what that sacred second self looks like. You're like, well, I thought it was like this before, but now I see it as more like this, okay? So a few months or maybe a year or two down the road, you had your sacred second self envisioned, and now you're going to alter it a little bit and you see it a little bit differently. What do you see yourself doing? Okay? You have to envision that. Now, I have this arrow here. Now, this is your attempt to climb up, but like a baby is helpless, there's certain things that you can't be disillusioned of on your own, and you need help from other people. That's why we have distributed cognition, model of edification in Ephesians 4:16, that collective intelligence there. And so your hope is, the things that you can't, being glorified, going to heaven, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, we have hope for that. But what I want to focus on is, between now and then, don't put this life on the back burner just for the next one, because you can have such an impact in this life, and that's the one you have to focus on. You have to focus on this one. And people say, well, in heaven it's all going to be better when we get to heaven. We ain't had no worry about this sin anymore. We ain't going to have any of them problems anymore. What are you doing to change things now, to make things better here and now, to grow and transform now? And I don't want to lay out a metaphysical theory for you, but I cannot stress the feeling that I have, that I get from Scripture, that what you do here so much matters for all eternity, regardless of what it looks like. It so matters, okay? And you have to play a role in what's coming next. So this agape. So I'd have, say, Jesus here, but now we know what he looks like. You have Jesus here, reaching down, ideally, self-sacrificially. Of course, Jesus has the greatest self-sacrifice for all of us, having died for us. Self-sacrificially draws a person to their sacred second self, to their pulling them up that upward ascent, up that anagogic growth, upward ascent, helping them grow, putting away childish things. Yet you're reaching down and pulling, drawing, tugging them, magnetically kind of drawing them if you can. I'm trying to think of something that like gently pulls and tugs without being forceful, still being meek, but still making it very clear which direction you need to go. It's a very orienting factor. And that agape is a set of orienting affordances that afford transformation and the arrival at the sacred second self. And it's not that you will ever get to your sacred second self, but you never hit what you don't aim for. You need to aim. You need to aim for it. You need to have it very clearly defined. You need to aim for it. You need to recalibrate. You got to hit it. So as Jesus reaches down through the you that is and grabs a hold of you and yanks you to be more like him, think about how he dealt with people, and also think about the more clearly you can see, the more you can help do that with other people. The more you can help Jesus can do that through you, in other words. You can reach into other people's lives self-sacrificially and help draw them and pull them and tug them up that upward anagogic growth ascent into being their transformed self. And hopefully, maybe, because of encountering and interacting with you, they can see more clearly as a result. That's what we want. We want people to see more clearly, to be transformed into the creature that can see, not through a glass darkly, but face to face, and we can see it more and more face to face every day. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you, and good day.